candlelight, crystal glasses, the soft swell of a jazz quartet drifting through a ballroom dressed for Christmas. 300 people laughed, clinked, leaned close, the kind of room where deals were made and names were remembered. And in the far corner, a 7-year-old girl sat perfectly still, watching mouths move, hearing nothing. Her name was Harper. Her mother was the most powerful woman in the room. Then a stranger pulled up a chair beside her. He didn't say a word. He used his hands. And for the first time all night, Harper smiled. The penthouse on the 53rd floor looked like something out of an architectural magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows, white marble countertops, furniture arranged with the kind of precision that suggested a decorator had been paid a great deal of money to make the place feel effortless. It was beautiful. It was immaculate. It didn't feel like a home. Olivia Hartwell was already dressed by 5:30 in the morning. Charcoal blazer hair pulled back, a cup of black coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. 47 emails. That was how many had arrived overnight. She stood at the kitchen window and scrolled through them in silence. The city of Manhattan spread out below her like a circuit board, gray and glittering under a skin of early December snow. She didn't hear Harper come in. She felt a small hand pressing against her arm, the only way a 7-year-old who had been deaf since birth knew how to say, "I'm here." Olivia turned. Harper stood in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep, clutching a large drawing book against her chest, the way other children held stuffed animals. Her eyes were calm and watchful. They were always watchful, those eyes taking in everything that her ears could not. Olivia smiled, set down her coffee, and reached out to smooth Harper's hair. Then she pointed to the kitchen table, where a plate of toast and sliced fruit had been left under a glass cover since the night before. Harper looked at the plate. She looked at her mother. Then she walked to the table and sat down alone. Olivia was already back on her phone. Harper opened her drawing book to a blank page near the middle and uncapped a pencil. She drew the same thing she always drew: a bridge. Two shores separated by open water and a long arc of structure reaching between them. Sometimes the bridge was finished. Sometimes it stopped halfway the far end, disappearing into fog. This morning, it stopped halfway. When Mrs. Paulson arrived at 7, a warm, broad-shouldered woman in her 60s who had been with the Hartwells for 4 years. She came through the door, already pulling off her coat and signing with both hands before she'd even set down her bag. "Good morning, little fish. Did you eat?" Harper's entire face changed. She pushed back from the table and signed back rapidly, pointing at the drawing book, then at the window, then making a shape with her fingers that meant snow, and also, somehow, beautiful. Mrs. Paulson laughed and signed something back. Harper laughed too, a bright, soundless laugh, her shoulders shaking, her eyes creasing at the corners. From across the kitchen, Olivia watched. Something moved through her chest. Not quite guilt, not quite grief. Something that didn't have a clean name. She picked up her coat and her bag. "I'll be home by 8, she said to Mrs. Paulson, and walked out the door. The offices of Hartwell Corporation occupied 4 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. By 9 in the morning, Olivia was seated at the head of a conference table, a presentation lit up on the wall behind her. 12 people watching her with the particular attentiveness that came from knowing their jobs depended on what happened next. The Meridian Capital acquisition, $200 million. The largest deal of Olivia's career, and the one that would, if it closed cleanly, make Hartwell Corporation a name that could not be ignored anywhere in the country. Daniel Reeves sat 2 seats down on her left. He was 43, silver-haired, and had the kind of easy smile that made people trust him before he had said anything worth trusting. He was Olivia's chief operating officer. He had been with her for 6 years. He nodded along to everything she said in that meeting, occasionally adding a phrase or two that made him sound collaborative, indispensable. He was very good at that. The meeting ended at 11. Olivia was walking back to her office when her phone rang. It was Mrs. Paulson's number. "Miss Hartwell." The older woman's voice was careful. "I'm sorry to call. I had a small fall on the front steps this morning. Nothing serious but my ankle. I'm afraid I won't be able to manage Harper tonight." Olivia stopped walking. Tonight was the Christmas Gala, an annual event hosted in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, attended by every major investor partner and board member her company had. It was not optional. It was not the kind of event where a CEO sent her apologies. She spent the next 40 minutes making calls, her assistant, her neighbor, a woman from Harper's school she had met twice at pickup. Nobody was available. Nobody could come on 4 hours' notice on the evening of December 22nd. She stood at her office window looking out at the pale winter sky and thought about what it meant to have built an entire life with no one in it to call. She drove home at 4 o'clock earlier than she had been home on a weekday in months. Harper was in the living room drawing. She looked up when her mother walked in the same calm, watchful expression. Olivia crouched down to Harper's level and spoke slowly the way she had learned to do. Not because Harper could read lips well, but because it felt wrong to speak quickly at someone who could not hear the hurry in your voice. "You're coming with me tonight," she said. "It's a party. It will be a little boring, but I need you with me." Harper looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded. That nod, small, resigned utterly without complaint, sat in Olivia's chest like a splinter for the rest of the afternoon. The Plaza Hotel had outdone itself for Christmas. A 20-foot tree stood in the center of the ballroom, its branches heavy with gold ornaments and white light. Candles ran the length of every table. A jazz quartet played near the entrance, the music full and warm filling every corner of the room. 300 people moved through that warmth, their voices layered on top of each other, their laughter rising and falling, glasses touching in small, bright collisions of sound. Harper stood at the entrance in a red dress and patent leather shoes, and took it all in with her eyes because her ears gave her nothing. Just the faint vibration of the bass through the marble floor. Just the movement of light. Olivia guided her to a table near the back, away from the high traffic areas, away from the bar close to the wall. She set Harper's drawing book on the table beside a glass of sparkling water and a bread roll. "Stay here," Olivia said, and shaped the words carefully. "I'll be right back." She wasn't right back. Harper sat. She watched a man in a tuxedo tell a joke to 4 people who all laughed at exactly the same moment. She watched 2 women air-kiss by the Christmas tree, neither of them quite touching the other. She watched a waiter navigate the crowd with a tray of champagne flutes, threading between bodies with extraordinary patience. She opened her drawing book and drew. Occasionally, someone nearby would notice her, a glance, a momentary softening of expression. Some of them looked away quickly, uncomfortable, in the way people sometimes were around a child who was different. One woman smiled at her with such concentrated pity that Harper dropped her eyes back to the paper. An hour passed, then another. Olivia moved through the room with the ease of someone in their natural element. She laughed at the right moments. She remembered names. She touched an arm here, leaned in there, made each person feel briefly that they were the most important one in the room. She glanced toward Harper's table twice, maybe 3 times, and saw a small figure sitting quietly. She read that as fine. She did not see the untouched bread roll. She did not see the drawing of the bridge that had grown across 2 pages, detailed and careful, and completely without people on either side. It was just past 9 o'clock when a man stopped walking. Lucas Brennan was 38 years old, with the kind of face that had learned to be patient. He worked in software, a small firm that had done some infrastructure work for Hartwell Corp the previous year, and he had come to the gala because his manager had forwarded the invitation and told him it would be good for business. He had been there for 40 minutes and had spoken to almost no one. He saw Harper at the corner table the way you notice something that doesn't fit, not wrong, exactly just out of place. A child at a corporate Christmas party sitting alone, drawing with focused concentration while the world moved around her. He walked over. He pulled out the chair across from her, He sat down. Harper looked up, and her expression said clearly, another adult who was about to smile at me and not know what to do next. Lucas did not smile uncomfortably. He didn't reach for his phone or look around to see whose child this was. He set both hands on the table, caught her eye, and signed, "What's your name?" Harper went completely still. For a moment, she just stared at him, at his hands, at his face, at his hands, again, as though she needed to confirm that what she had just seen was real, that a stranger at a party had actually spoken to her in the only language she fully owned. Her hands moved slowly at first, then faster. "Harper. You know sign language?" Lucas smiled, a real one, the kind that reached his eyes. A little. "Want to teach me more?" What followed was the most alive Harper had been all evening. Her hands flew. She corrected him when he got a shape wrong, which happened often, and each correction made her laugh, that silent, whole-body laugh that used her shoulders and her eyes and everything she had. Lucas made deliberate mistakes just to watch her laugh again. Across the room, Olivia finished a conversation with a board member and turned to check on her daughter. She saw a man she didn't recognize sitting at Harper's table. She saw her daughter's face, and for a moment, just a moment, she forgot to move. She crossed the room. Lucas stood as she approached, extending his hand. "Lucas Brennan. I hope I haven't overstepped. Harper and I were just talking." "She's my daughter," Olivia said. Then more carefully, You were signing with her." "I was trying to," Lucas said. "She's been patient with my mistakes." Harper was pulling at Olivia's hand now, fingers moving rapidly, face bright, with something Olivia hadn't seen in a long time. She looked at her daughter's hands. She watched them move. She understood nothing. Not a single gesture. Not a shape. Not a direction. Not an expression. 7 years old, and her daughter was speaking a language at full speed, and Olivia was standing right there, and it was completely foreign to her. Lucas watched her face. His voice was quiet and without judgment when he said, "She's telling you the joke I just got wrong. It's a good one," he translated. Harper giggled when her mother's expression shifted. Then Lucas asked gently, as though the question were simple, "Do you know ASL?" Olivia opened her mouth. She was a woman who had answers for everything in boardrooms and negotiations, across tables, from people who wanted to rattle her. She always had an answer. "I haven't had the time," she said. Lucas nodded. He didn't press. He didn't lecture. But the look in his eyes, not pity, not quite, more like the recognition of someone who has seen this before, who knows exactly what those words cost, and what they cost someone else. That look followed Olivia for the rest of the night. On the drive home, Harper fell asleep in the back seat, still holding her drawing book. Olivia kept both hands on the wheel and said nothing, the image of that unfinished bridge turning quietly in her mind. The morning after the gala, Olivia woke at 5:15. She lay in the dark for a few minutes, which was unusual. She was not a woman who lingered in bed, but something from the night before had settled into her like cold water, and she needed a moment before she could decide what to do with it. By the time Harper appeared in the kitchen doorway, same pajamas, same tangled hair, same drawing book, Olivia had made a decision. She was already seated at the kitchen table instead of standing at the window. She had made oatmeal instead of leaving out a covered plate. She sat across from her daughter's chair and waited. Harper came in slowly, as if surprised by the change in arrangement. She sat down. She looked at the oatmeal. She looked at her mother. Olivia smiled. She pointed at the oatmeal, then at Harper, then gave a thumbs up, the only gesture she was reasonably sure meant what she intended it to mean. Harper's expression was polite. She picked up her spoon. They sat across from each other in silence that had nothing peaceful about it. Olivia opened her mouth once and then closed it again, because she had no idea how to begin a conversation with someone she could not speak to. She could run a board meeting. She could negotiate terms across a table from men who had spent decades trying to make her feel small. She did not know how to say good morning to her own child in any language that would land. She reached for her laptop. She typed, "How to learn ASL fast." A list of results appeared. She clicked on the first one. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Reeves' emergency pre-meeting before the 7 a.m. call. "Need you online in 20 minutes. Olivia looked at the screen. She looked at the search results. She closed the laptop. She didn't look up quickly enough to miss it. Harper across the table watching her mother close the laptop. The girl's eyes moved from the screen to her mother's face. She didn't say anything. She opened her drawing book and found a blank page. The bridge she drew that morning had no far shore at all. The week that followed moved the way weeks did, when Olivia let them fast dense and organized entirely around other people's needs. The Meridian acquisition required 3 separate rounds of document review. There were 2 investor calls and a site visit to prepare for. Daniel was in her office every morning before 9, efficient and attentive, asking the right questions. The laptop tab stayed closed. By the following Monday, Olivia had made a different kind of decision. She called her assistant and asked her to track down contact information for Lucas Brennan, the man from the gala, the software contractor, the one who had signed with Harper. Within the hour, she had a phone number. She told herself it was a courtesy call, a thank you. She invited him to the office. Lucas arrived on a Wednesday afternoon slightly early, in a jacket that suggested he'd made an effort, without being entirely comfortable with it. Harper was there too, Mrs. Paulson had brought her after school, and Harper sat in the corner of Olivia's office with her drawing book, while the adults talked, which was normally how these things went. Olivia offered coffee. Lucas accepted. She got to the point quickly, the way she always did. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for what you did at the gala. I don't always know what she's getting out of those evenings. It was good for her to talk to someone." Lucas nodded. "She's sharp. She was correcting my hand shapes within the first 5 minutes. How did you—" Olivia started, then tried to find a less blunt way to finish the question. There wasn't one. "How do you know sign language?" Lucas turned his coffee cup once on the table. Then he said, "My daughter. Her name is Mia. She's 9. Deaf since birth, same as Harper." He said it the way people say things they have explained many times, not rehearsed, but settled the rough edges worn smooth by repetition. Her mother left when Mia was 3. He continued. It was too much for her. The appointments, the school decisions, the learning curve of raising a child who communicates differently. I understand it to some degree. It is a lot. But she left, and it was just the 2 of us. Olivia said nothing. She kept her expression neutral, which was something she was trained for, but it cost her something this time. "I didn't know any sign language when Mia was born," Lucas said. "For the first 2 years, we got by with gestures and expressions, and a lot of guessing. I thought that was enough. I thought she was fine." He looked at his hands. She wasn't fine. She was just quiet. He had started learning ASL the month after Mia turned 3. Books first, then community classes on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, then a private tutor on Saturday mornings. He had been terrible at it for a long time. His hand shapes were wrong. His spatial grammar was inconsistent. Mia would watch him and blink with the patience of someone who had decided it was kinder not to point out every mistake. "It took about 2 years before I could hold a real conversation with her," Lucas said. "Not a simple one, a real one, where she could say something complicated and I could follow it and respond, and she knew I was actually listening." He described the first time it had worked, a winter evening. Mia sitting at the kitchen table and Lucas signing, "I love you" correctly for the first time without having to think through the shape. Mia had looked at his hands. Then she had gotten up and hugged him and cried in that quiet, airless way she had when something mattered. "She wasn't crying because I finally said it," Lucas said. "She was crying because she'd been waiting for it for 2 years. That's when I understood what I'd been taking from her without meaning to." Olivia had gone very still. She asked, "Do you regret those 2 years? The ones before you started?" Lucas looked at her directly. "I regret that I waited. I don't regret that I started." He let that sit for a moment. There's a difference. Across the room, Harper had stopped drawing. She was watching her mother's face with the same careful attention she gave to everything cataloging, reading, understanding things that didn't require sound. It was the first time Harper had seen her mother sit and listen to another person without checking her phone. The girl turned back to her drawing book. On the page, the bridge grew a little longer. 3 weeks after the gala, Olivia hired a sign language instructor for Harper, a young woman named Sophie, who came to the apartment on Monday and Wednesday afternoons. Sophie was easy with children, quick to laugh, and within 2 sessions had earned Harper's complete trust. On a Thursday evening in January, Olivia was in the kitchen when she heard the front door and Sophie's voice calling a brief goodbye. She came out to find Sophie still in the hallway coat, on holding a folded piece of paper. "Miss Hartwell." Sophie's voice had something careful in it. "Harper made this today during our session. I thought you should see it." She held out the paper. Olivia unfolded it. It was a drawing done in pencil and crayon, Harper's work, unmistakably with that same deliberate quality her daughter brought to everything. A bridge across a wide blue gap. On the left side of the bridge, a small girl stood alone. On the right side, a man and a younger girl stood close together, the man's hand resting on the girl's shoulder. Above the bridge in Harper's careful block, letters slightly uneven, but entirely legible. "I wish Mr. Lucas was my dad." Olivia stood in the hallway for a long time after Sophie left. She didn't cry from jealousy. She wasn't angry at Lucas, or at Harper, or at the simple and devastating honesty of a 7-year-old who had no reason to protect her mother's feelings. She cried because she understood exactly what the drawing meant, and it had nothing to do with Lucas Brennan. Her daughter wasn't wishing for a different parent. She was wishing for a parent who could speak to her. And in 7 years, Olivia had not become that. She folded the drawing carefully. She put it in the inside pocket of the jacket she kept on the hallway hook, close where she would feel it. Then she called a sign language instructor for herself. She started the following week. Her instructor was a patient, methodical man named Gary, who had been teaching ASL for over 20 years and had clearly worked with reluctant adult learners before. He came to the apartment at 11 o'clock at night after Harper was asleep, and they sat at the kitchen table for an hour, with a workbook and a laptop. Olivia was not a natural student. She was accustomed to being competent, and being incompetent at anything produced in her a low-grade misery that she covered with determination. She practiced handshapes in the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning. She watched instructional videos on her phone during the car ride to the office. She muttered through vocabulary lists at her desk between calls. On a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into her lessons, she tried. Harper was eating breakfast. Olivia came into the kitchen, took a breath, and signed breakfast. At least she intended to sign breakfast. What her hands apparently produced was something closer to afraid, or possibly brown. Harper's account was unclear because Harper was too busy staring at her mother's hands with an expression of pure bewilderment. Then the girl shook her head, slowly stood up, walked to the cabinet, and got her own cereal. Olivia sat at the table with her hands in her lap. She laughed. It came out more fragile than she intended. She tried to remember that Gary had told her beginners always looked like they were making things up, and that the only way through it was to keep going. She kept going. A week later, Harper came downstairs in the blue dress she wore for school, the one with the small white flowers that she had chosen herself, and refused to retire, despite Olivia's gentle suggestions about whether it still fit. Olivia looked at her daughter standing in the kitchen doorway, 7 years old, and already so thoroughly herself, and signed one word: beautiful. Harper stopped walking. She looked at her mother's hands. Then she looked at her mother's face. A smile crossed her own small sideways, almost reluctant, as if she hadn't quite decided to give it yet. And she turned and walked quickly down the hall, as though she hadn't wanted to be caught. But Olivia had seen it. She held on to it for the rest of the day, like something she was afraid of dropping. Then came the night before the second major presentation to the Meridian Capital investors. Olivia sat at her desk at 10:45 with two things in front of her: a folder of financial projections that needed another review, and her ASL workbook open to a section on expressing time and emotion. Gary had assigned it 2 sessions ago, and she hadn't finished it. She looked at the folder. She looked at the workbook. For the first time in her adult life, she closed the folder. She found out about Daniel on a Friday. She had been called into a closed session with the board, unusual last-minute no agenda sent in advance. She arrived to find 4 board members seated in a configuration that told her before anyone opened their mouth that this was not a routine check-in. Daniel Reeves, it emerged, had requested a private meeting with 3 board members the previous week. He had presented a case organized, measured, credible in the way only careful preparation can be, that Olivia had become, in his words, divided in her priorities during the most critical phase of the Meridian acquisition. He hadn't used the word distracted. He had used phrases like personal obligations, creating bandwidth concerns, and leadership clarity at a crossroads moment. He had suggested a transitional structure, himself as interim chief executive, while Olivia took a step back. Olivia listened to the summary from the board chair without moving. Then she drove home. The apartment was quiet. Harper had been asleep for an hour. On the kitchen table left there by Mrs. Paulson was a single sheet of paper, Harper's graded quiz from Sophie's afternoon session. The score was perfect. At the bottom in Sophie's handwriting, Harper asked twice today whether you'd be picking her up. I told her you were working late. She said, "Okay. Just thought you should know." Olivia sat down on the floor in the hallway outside Harper's door. Not on a chair, not on the couch. The floor, her back against the wall in the dark. She had spent years building something she was proud of, and in 1 week, the man she had trusted most within it had tried to take it from her, using the one real thing she had tried to change as evidence against her. And her daughter had asked for her twice and been told she wasn't coming, and said okay because she was used to it, because she had learned not to expect otherwise. Olivia pressed her hands flat against her knees. She thought about the bridge in Harper's drawings. She thought about the word okay coming out of a 7-year-old who deserved so much better than okay. She thought, something has to give. And I get to choose which thing. She called Lucas the next morning before 7. Not about Harper. Not about sign language or Sophie or any of the practical things she could have framed it around. She called because she was still sitting on the floor outside her daughter's door at 6:15, and she needed to hear from someone who had already walked the length of this particular dark before she could make herself stand up. Lucas answered on the 3rd ring, his voice unhurried, in the way of someone who woke early by habit rather than obligation. Olivia told him about the board meeting, about Daniel, about the note Sophie had left on the kitchen table. She said it all in the flat, efficient language of someone delivering a report, but Lucas had enough practice listening to what people didn't say that he heard the rest of it clearly. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When Mia was 4 years old, she had her first performance at her school, a little winter show, 30 kids on a stage, each of them doing something they'd been practicing for weeks. Mia had been learning to fingerspell her full name front to back without stopping." Olivia listened. "I had a product meeting that afternoon that I told myself I couldn't reschedule," Lucas said. "I showed up to the school 40 minutes after it ended. Mia was sitting outside the auditorium with her teacher still in her costume. When she saw me, she didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just nodded the way you nod when someone does exactly what you expected them to do." He stopped there. The weight of it didn't need elaboration. "That nod," he said, "stayed with me longer than anything else in those years, because it meant she'd already adjusted her expectations. She'd already done the work of not counting on me, so that when I failed it wouldn't hurt as much. That's not something a 4-year-old should have to learn to do." Olivia's hand tightened around her phone. "What did you do after that?" she asked. "I started telling her," Lucas said. "Every single time I had to be somewhere, I told her before I left. Not just Dad has a meeting, the real version. Dad has a meeting at 4 o'clock on Thursday. It will take about 2 hours. I will be home before dinner. I will be there. She didn't need me to be perfect. She needed to know she was worth being told the truth. Olivia sat with that for a moment. Then she got off the floor, put on her jacket, and went to the board meeting. She told the truth there, too. She walked into the room and looked at 4 board members and said clearly and without performance that she had not managed the balance well during the meridian process, that there had been weeks where she had allowed the scale to tip too far in the wrong direction, and that she was aware of it, and that she had already made changes at home that she intended to keep. She proposed a clearer delegation structure for the meridian closing team. She proposed a revised schedule that protected certain hours in her day as non-negotiable. She said none of this was a concession, it was a correction, and there was a difference. Daniel Reeves, sitting 2 seats to her left in the same chair he always occupied, let the first part of the meeting play out before he made his move. He presented his case with the same composed confidence he brought to everything, a restructured leadership arrangement, a temporary transition, the language of someone who had rehearsed this and decided it was reasonable. He said, "I only raise this because I care about the outcome of Meridian, and I think we all want the company to be led by someone whose full attention is available." Olivia let him finish. Then she opened the second folder she had brought. The story behind that folder had begun 6 weeks earlier, on a mild Saturday afternoon in January, when Olivia had arranged for Lucas to bring Mia to the park near the Hartwell building. The 2 girls had met for the first time that afternoon. Mia, 9 years old, and self-possessed in the way of children who have had to be, and Harper, 7, still cautious around new people, but visibly curious. Within 20 minutes, they were signing to each other in the shorthand of children who recognize a shared world. Lucas and Olivia sat on a bench nearby and watched. At some point during the afternoon, Harper had tugged on Lucas's sleeve and signed to him with the particular precision she reserved for things she considered important. She had seen a man she recognized, a man she had noticed twice before, standing outside the glass tower where her mother worked, meeting someone in a dark suit at the corner near the park entrance. She described both men carefully the way a child describes things when she has been watching with no other occupation, with the visual clarity of someone for whom observation is primary. Lucas had recognized the first man from a technical onboarding meeting he had attended at Hartwell Corp the previous year. He had shaken hands with Daniel Reeves in a conference room and remembered the silver hair and the careful smile. He had told Olivia about it that same evening, not sure of its significance. Olivia had understood its significance immediately. Her investigator had spent the following weeks building the documentation, now sitting in the folder on the conference table. Dates, locations, a chain of correspondence obtained through entirely proper channels. 3 meetings between Daniel Reeves and a partner at the firm, representing Hartwell's primary competitor in the Meridian bid, spanning 2 months, during which enough had been shared to give the competing offer a structural advantage it should not have had. She laid the pages out on the table one by one. The room was very still. Daniel looked at the documents. He looked at Olivia. The composed confidence did not leave his face all at once. It receded slowly, like water pulling back from a shoreline, leaving something bare and exposed underneath. He resigned by end of business that day. The Meridian acquisition closed 6 weeks later on schedule under Olivia's full leadership. Later, much later, when Olivia thought about what had brought the truth about Daniel to light, she kept returning to the same thing. Her daughter had been sitting in a park, watching, a little girl that the world had consistently underestimated because she could not hear it. And because she could not hear it, she had learned to see it with a clarity and patience that most adults spent their whole lives trying to cultivate. Harper had seen what no one else had noticed, and she had described it in careful and precise sign language to the one person who would eventually tell her mother. The child who everyone assumed heard nothing had been the one who saw everything. Olivia changed her schedule the week after the board meeting. She blocked 4 o'clock every day as a hard stop, not a guideline, not a preference. A hard stop. Her assistant was instructed that the only exceptions were genuine emergencies, and that meetings scheduled after 3:30 were to be rerouted. The first Saturday that she was home with no plans and no calls, she sat down on the living room floor. Harper was already there with her drawing book surrounded by colored pencils, arranged in a careful gradation from dark to light the way she always organized them. She looked up when her mother lowered herself to the rug, and her expression was the same measuring look she often wore, patient, watchful, not yet convinced. Olivia pointed to the drawing book, then to herself. Then she made her hands into the rough shape of the question she had been practicing. "Can you teach me?" The hand shape was wrong. Harper tilted her head, studying it. Then, without ceremony, she reached over and repositioned her mother's fingers gently, with the focused authority of a 7-year-old who understood this subject better than the adult in front of her. She held Olivia's corrected hand in place for a moment, checking, then signed the question properly herself as a demonstration. They spent the next hour going through Harper's drawing book, every animal, every object, every color. Harper would sign a word, and Olivia would attempt to repeat it, and most of the time she was wrong in ways that were apparently either endearingly terrible or genuinely funny, because Harper laughed a real laugh, not the polite half-smile she produced when adults made efforts she didn't quite trust. When Olivia's attempt at giraffe produced something that Harper apparently found completely baffling, the girl laughed so hard she had to set down her pencil and press both hands over her mouth. Olivia laughed too. There was nothing fragile about it this time. 2 weeks later, she brought Harper to the office. It was a Thursday afternoon, mid-February, the building quieter than usual, because half the Meridian team was off-site. Olivia walked through the main floor with Harper beside her, not behind her, not trailing, but beside, and stopped at the first cluster of desks. Her employees looked up. Some of them had never met Harper. A few knew about her in the vague background way people know things about their boss's personal life that they've been given no direct information about. Olivia signed, "This is my daughter Harper." She was slow. She stopped twice and looked at Harper to check her hand shapes, and Harper made small corrections without fuss. One of the analysts near the window started signing back a basic greeting, clearly learned from somewhere, and Harper's face opened entirely. The floor was quiet in the particular way of people paying attention to something they didn't expect to find meaningful. When Olivia finished, someone started clapping. Then everyone did. Harper stood very straight in the middle of the office floor, her cheeks flushed, her chin lifted. She looked like someone who had just been seen by a room full of people, and found to her own slight surprise that she didn't mind it at all. On the drive home, she signed to her mother from the back seat, fast, fluid, the way she signed when she forgot to slow down for an audience. Olivia caught maybe half of it. She caught the word proud, and she caught what she was fairly sure was, again meaning Harper wanted to come back. "Yes." Olivia signed, one hand on the steering wheel. Again. That evening, Olivia sat on the edge of Harper's bed, with the drawing book across her knees. She opened it to a story Harper had been illustrating for the past several weeks, a wordless sequence about a bird and a lighthouse, with a narrative logic that was entirely its own and entirely coherent. She signed the story as she turned the pages. She was slow and imperfect, and she had to stop several times to reconstruct a word or ask Harper to repeat a sign she'd forgotten. Harper didn't sleep. She sat up in bed, back straight, duvet pooled around her waist, watching her mother's hands with the same focused attention she gave to everything that mattered. They finished the book. Harper looked at the last page for a long moment. Then she signed deliberately, making sure her mother would catch it. Again. Olivia signed it back again. The signing ceremony for the Meridian Capital acquisition was held on a Thursday morning in March in the main conference room of the Hartwell building, with 200 people seated in rows, board members, legal counsel, the Meridian team, press, and staff. A podium had been set up at the front. There were cameras. Harper sat in the front row, not a corner seat. Not a table near the back. The front row in the middle between Lucas and his daughter Mia, who was 9 years old, and had her father's patient eyes and her own particular way of holding herself still, but not tense alert, but not anxious. The two girls had spent enough afternoons together by now that they had developed the abbreviated private signing of people who know each other well. They sat together now, the way children sit when they are entirely comfortable, leaning slightly toward each other, occasionally exchanging small signs that had the quality of a language within a language. Olivia stepped to the podium. She began in English. She thanked the Meridian partners by name. She acknowledged the board, the legal team, the months of work that had brought them to this room. Her voice was steady and clear. The voice she had spent years refining for exactly these moments, confident without being forceful, precise without being cold. Then she looked down. Harper was watching her from the front row, hands folded in her lap, head slightly tilted. The same watchful expression, the same careful attention. 7 years old, and already so practiced at watching the world from a distance. Olivia stopped speaking. The room noticed. 200 people felt the shift, the sudden absence of her voice, the different quality of the silence that followed. She raised her hands. She signed. You taught me that leading doesn't mean being the loudest voice in the room. Her hands were not perfect. They never were. But they were clear, and they were deliberate, and they were aimed directly at her daughter. Sometimes the strongest person is the one who knows how to be still. And listen. The room had gone completely quiet. Not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for the next sentence. A different kind. The kind that happens when something real enters a room full of people who spend most of their time being careful. Harper's hands rose slowly from her lap. Her eyes were wide. Her expression moved through something complicated surprise and recognition, and something softer underneath something that had been waiting a long time to be allowed out into the open. She signed, You are becoming my best mom. Olivia stepped away from the podium. She walked down from the platform between the rows, and she crossed to her daughter and knelt down in front of her, right there on the floor in front of 200 people in her blazer, and her careful professional composure that had held for years and was not holding now. She put her arms around Harper and held on. Harper held on too, her small hands pressed flat against her mother's back, the way she had learned to communicate presence. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And this time, the person she was holding understood exactly what it meant. The room came apart in applause. That evening after the ceremony, after the photographs and the handshakes and the slow dispersal of 200 people back into their regular lives, Olivia and Harper sat together on the window seat in the penthouse. Snow was falling outside late for March, soft and unhurried, settling on the ledges and the rooftops and the long gray grid of the city below. Harper had her drawing book. She worked quietly for several minutes, her pencil moving with the focused certainty she always brought to the page. When she finished, she turned the book around and held it up. A bridge. The same bridge she had been drawing since before Olivia knew to look for it. But this one was different. 2 figures stood at the center of the arc, side by side. Their hands connected a line of pencil that was also unmistakably a choice. Harper signed, The bridge is finished. Olivia looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she looked at her daughter, at the face she knew better than any face in the world, and had spent too many years looking at without really seeing. She signed slowly, making sure every shape was right. I'm sorry I was late, but I'm here. Harper looked at her mother's hands. Then she looked at her mother's face. She nodded. Not the nod of a child who had learned to expect less. Not the small, resigned motion of someone adjusting quietly to disappointment. This was something else entirely, the nod of a person who has been found, who has been seen, who has been waited for, and has finally unmistakably arrived. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, two people sat together in the light of a window, 53 floors above a city that kept moving without them, and for the first time in 7 years, neither of them was on the other side of anything. Closing note. Love is not always instinct. Sometimes it is a skill learned slowly badly, at first full of wrong shapes and false starts. But no word in any language costs more than the sentence, "I'm here." And a child will remember not the years you were absent, but the day you decided to stay.